Founded along the upper reaches of the Eileen River, the city of East Estate was one of the 5 cities surrounding the blister, domain of the ancient green dragon that was its namesake. As the principal city of the Azalesian frontier, it lay on the crossroads of the Western Imperial Highway and the Dwarven Highway leading to Fiodura. Though it served as the main hub of trade between the Dwarf Kingdom and the Baharuth Empire, trade with the dwarves had diminished to effectively nothing until recent times. Their caravan arrived at East Estate's southern gate amidst a light flurry and, after a brief inspection by the customs officers, made its way through the city to their inn near the perhaps not so imaginatively named Dwarf Gate, the western entrance to the city. It was here that the greatest massifs of the Azalesia Mountains loomed large over the Baharuth Empire. Nemel constantly looked up at the shrouded peaks with a wondrous expression. "Are the mountains that interesting to look at?" Dame Verilyn asked. "They're just so majestic," Nemel breathed. "The frost dragons are from there, aren't they?" "Some frost dragons live there," Dame Verilyn replied, "but their ancestors were from elsewhere. It would be a rather sad state of affairs if they only existed in this tiny place." "Where else do frost dragons live?" "Anywhere that they fancy, which is preferably somewhere cold. The greatest population that I know of exists across the ocean to the north." As their wagon turned to enter the yard of their merchant inn, Dame Verilyn paused near the door of the tavern. Nemel watched as she seemed to focus on sights unseen. "Do you always do that?" she asked. "If it's a building that I'm about to enter, yes," Dame Verilyn replied. "There's no reason for me not to, is there?" "I was just wondering. It seems awfully convenient to have senses like that." "I haven't ever dwelled on whether my own senses are convenient or not, but, by your measures, I suppose they are." Dame Verilyn strolled off towards the city center, her graceful figure casting a long shadow over the cobbled streets. Caught off guard, Nemel jogged over to catch up. "We're not checking in?" "Zusharu should be able to handle himself in there," Dame Verilyn told her. "We, on the other hand, are being stalked." "Stalked?" Perhaps that was too strong a word. "Several individuals have been observing us since we entered the city. 3 males, 6 females. All humans. When we walked off in this direction, they all followed us. More accurately, they were here." Since their journey from Ingelfort was so uneventful, Nemel had completely forgotten about the reason why she had been sent to accompany Dame Verilyn in the first place. On the first few days of their journey, she thought that people from other factions would come galloping from behind to catch up. Belatedly, she realized that it was easier to intercept them by going straight to East Estate from our winter. Nemel clutched her cloak, drawing it around her shoulders. "Should we hide?" she asked. "Should we?" Dame Verilyn asked back. "You would know better than I when it comes to these Imperial, what are they called, exactly?" "I don't know. This already feels creepy, so I think calling them stalkers is fine." "Very well," Dame Verilyn nodded. "As a fellow stalker, what is your assessment?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. How did she end up being a stalker? They continued on their way down the main thoroughfare. Dame Verilyn seemed less concerned about the stalkers and more interested in seeing what there was to see. A busy city plaza drew her attention and she meandered back and forth to the admiring gazes of the citizenry. When they stopped to line up at a food stand, Nemel drew closer to Dame Verilyn. "What are they doing?" she whispered. "They're lining up for those venison skewers." "That's not what I meant." Nemel kept her voice low. "I was talking about those stalkers." "That's who I was talking about," Dame Verilyn replied. Nemel froze, a chill running up her spine. She glanced over her shoulder. Behind them were about a half-dozen men and women, but she couldn't tell who their stalkers were. Maybe it was all of them. "Can't they wear black cloaks with black cowls and black masks so I can tell them apart? I'm just a stupid wizard." It didn't help that half the plaza was staring at Dame Verilyn. Nemel combed her fingers lightly through her hair, conscious of the stares that were not quite directed at her. Annoyingly, even as such pressing matters were at hand, a tiny bit of her ego was screaming, "Hey, look at me, too. I'm not bad either." She really wasn't that bad looking. Nobles were almost always at least 2 or 3 cuts above the average commoner in appearance. "So what will they do next?" Dame Verilyn asked. Try and talk to you, I guess. And then? Learn stuff, maybe. They're here to get on your good side on behalf of their superiors, so they'll want to figure out what you like. You know, I still don't think this sounds as bad as you make it out to be. Nemel whimpered, turning a pleading expression towards Dame Verilyn. The truth remained that it wasn't. Dame Verilyn had something everyone wanted, and they could probably offer more than House Gran had many times over. They would probably even get the potato farms along the way. When it came their turn at the stall, Dame Verilyn purchased far too many skewers and walked away. I suppose we should find out what they'll do, Dame Verilyn said. Being followed around all evening is not something I'd particularly enjoy. With a hopeless sigh, Nemel followed along until they reached the fountain in the center of the plaza. What had she been doing all this time? General Ray had secured a week-long head start for her and she hadn't made any moves to earn Dame Verilyn's favor. Nemel sat down beside Dame Verilyn, nibbling despondently at the skewer she handed to her. Well, this is amusing. What is? Nemel asked. In the end, Dame Verilyn answered, I think I was right to categorize it as stalking. They're like many different predators going after the same prey, but now that they're all aware of one another they're stuck sizing each other up. Nemel looked out in the direction that Dame Verilyn was looking, which was pointless. With blind sight, the frost dragon could look everywhere at once. She focused on Dame Verilyn, who was wearing a slight smile. There was a cold gleam in her eye, as if she found what she saw entertaining, yet beneath her at the same time. In the end, they finished their snack, or was it a meal? And continued on their way without being approached by a single person. Nemel could sort of understand what was going on between all of the people following them. Precedence was an integral part of imperial culture. One could find its observance from common conduct to the highest courts. Everything was ordered according to rank, prestige, wealth and any other number of things relevant to a given situation. There were probably so many different factions in contention that it had become a figurative snarl as they tried to sort themselves out. There were all sorts of noble factions, but the imperial dynasty towered above them all. But what if the imperial army got involved? Now you had powerful generals who only answered to the emperor and things started to get muddled. Then there were individual measures such as the quality of the agent, their apparent expertise, and the resources they had at their disposal. A dozen different things put the proper order in question. General Ray's quick response added another layer to that. A nobody noble was in the place that everyone wanted, which threatened to throw everything into chaos. Nemel wasn't sure if that part had been calculated, but it paralyzed any decisive moves by major factions as smaller ones might see Nemel's existence as precedent to overturn precedents. It seemed that she was safe, at least until they sorted themselves out. In the interim, she needed to figure out how to convince Dame Verilyn that she shouldn't entertain any of their overtures. After wandering around the city and picking up 6 more stalkers, they returned to the Merchant Inn. Nemel idly gazed over the area, absorbing the warm, brisk atmosphere of their surroundings. Zushiru and his apprentices were speaking to different merchants who were, in turn, doing an admirable job at keeping their expressions straight in front of their frightful faces. Her eyes crossed over Curtis, who was sitting around with the other wagon drivers, and was reminded of an earlier discussion. See? Nemel said, humans aren't as bad as Curtis says. The men and women here aren't doing anything that he said we do. These ones aren't, Dame Verilyn agreed. But why is that? Zushiru and his apprentices are interacting with merchants, who are accustomed to dealing with all sorts of clientele. Even if these merchants are not as well traveled as those sent out into the world by merchant companies, they all share a common culture and expectations for their dealings. To the inn staff, they are paying customers, and I've witnessed humans accommodate far worse patrons in their establishments, who happen to be other humans. It's not just them, Nemel pressed her case. The Imperial Army didn't give them any trouble at the gate, neither did the night patrols in the city. Our empire isn't the nation of bigots that Curtis suggests. Dame Verilyn ordered dinner for them. Nemel was already full from the market fair and she silently wondered how much weight she would put on by the end of their journey. They brought everything up to their suite to continue their discussion in private. Nemel cast several spells just in case something had been planted in their room or someone was trying to observe them with divination magic. They seated themselves on 2 cushy couches with a small oak table between them. When all of your laws and rules are stripped away, Dame Verilyn said, what do humans become? How do they behave? Never mind a lack of laws and rules, how do they act when they think no one is looking? The question felt like a trap. One where she could only speak the truth if she wanted to survive unscathed. Due to her draconic senses, Dame Verilyn probably already knew the answer to her question. It depends on the person, Nemel replied. Some people do whatever they think they can get away with to get what they want. Others try to make the world around them a better place, even if it costs them. Are those two not the same thing? Dame Verilyn asked. The latter is simply an application of the former. Achieving desired results within a range of acceptable tolerances. This is a part of the answer that I'm seeking from my journey, but it goes much deeper than that. What do you mean? Simply put, I wish to understand the soul of humanity. Was she looking for some sort of philosophical thing? Some of the more eccentric members of the Imperial Ministry of Magic wrapped themselves up in those types of studies. The Imperial administration saw it as a potential avenue by which to eventually supplant the power of the temples, but, as far as Nemel knew, they didn't really get anywhere. Research was often like that, however, so they were allowed to continue despite their lack of tangible results. Then again, dragons were often associated with their own brand of magic, or at least dragons of ancient legend were. Since dragons were, by and large, legendary creatures, it was difficult to say what was what. How old was Dame Verilyn, anyway? That sounds like a question for the temples, Nemel said. No matter what, though, the Empire has rules to ensure that a civilized society can prosper. It doesn't matter what people are like inside. In that case, Dame Verilyn said, why doesn't the Empire have any goblin citizens? Because they're goblins. I don't understand why you keep doing that. You just said that it doesn't matter what people are like inside, only that they follow the rules for a civilized society. Dame Verilyn reached into a pouch at her waist, producing a book with a crimson cover. She held it up between them. Have you read these novels? Nemel scanned the title, though she already had a good idea of what it was the moment it had appeared. I don't know anyone that hasn't, she replied. Dreams of Red is that a 3? Yes. Anyway, what do you think of the character Rin? What do you mean anyway? That's Dreams of Red 3. Everyone in the Empire has been waiting for that to come out. Damn it, why do dragons have all the advantages? She tried to crawl out from under the sheer unfairness of the world that pressed down upon her. Maybe Dame Verilyn would let her borrow it. If you're trying to use her story as an allegory, well, it's true that a lot of people find that kind of significance in Dreams of Red. But it's almost always with the other characters. Every major character was like a force of nature in Dreams of Red, yet every reader found a part of themselves represented in them. Civilians identified with Clarence and Julian. Martial sorts latched onto Ludwig. Even the temples appreciated how religion was fairly incorporated into many of the characters. The free-spirited Veronica was Nemel's favorite. She didn't have the advantages of the nobles in the story and was often plagued with worries, just like Nemel. Yet Veronica doggedly kept going despite the often terrible things that happened and slowly worked her way up through small successes. Nemel had cried when Veronica finally met her soulmate in Ludwig and started to truly blossom. Rin, however. I think Rin is nice, Nemel said in the diplomatic way that many employed with fans of Rin. Probably too nice. That's fine because it's just a story and it makes people feel good, but can such a fluffy ball of warmth and acceptance truly exist? She's talented in many ways, but she also just wins over everyone with pure charisma. All of the savage barbarian tribes, even the monsters. There's absolutely no way that can happen in real life. Rin serves as the catalyst for that aspect of the story, Dame Verilyn said, but it doesn't stop with her. All of the peoples that she touches go on to become citizens of the Great Hegemony. It doesn't happen overnight and there are various things that everyone must learn, but it happens, yes? It's still a story. Realistically, Rin wouldn't exist and the Great Hegemony would have imposed order upon them. I'm sure Ludwig fans would have loved that. It would be a lie to say that Nemel didn't find Ludwig's military exploits exciting, but his most rabid fans just wanted him to conquer everything. He was a martial paragon who was idolized by the militant nobility, the vast majority of the imperial army, and those who aspired to their ideals. With order and strength came peace and prosperity. I find it strange that, despite your rejection of certain ideas presented in the story, you have an unwavering belief that order can prevail to create a better society. In my time here so far, this seems to be a common thread in the attitudes of the Empire's subjects. Every citizen of the Empire understands that what we currently enjoy as a nation is a result of the order established by generations of emperors. And we do have a few demi-humans that live peacefully in the Empire. What makes those ones so different from the ones attacked by Imperial patrols? Dame Verilyn asked. The way that you've behaved on our journey so far demonstrates that some races are viewed no differently than vermin. Nemel wished she could force understanding into her words. They were of no threat to Dame Verilyn, which was probably why she could treat them with such indifference. Because goblins and giantkin like trolls and ogres are evil and violent and dangerous, she said. They attack people and eat them, or they raid our lands, destroy property, and steal livestock. We can't afford to wait and see whether they'll attack us because it'll be too late for innocent citizens when they do. You speak as if some part of their nature demands that they specifically attack humans, Dame Verilyn replied. It should be as Curtis says, yes? They act because they believe they must. If an understandable alternative is provided with sufficient incentive, then they would favor the alternative instead. If it was that simple, then someone would have done it. Dame Verilyn cleared her plate. She seemed to fall deep into thought as she munched away. Simple, I see. This is something I had not considered, strangely enough. Are you going to eat that? Nemel looked down at her own dinner, which was barely touched. She shook her head, and Dame Verilyn reached out to bring it to her side of the table. Yes, this explains much that has puzzled me over the past few months. What does? Human simplicity. Dragons have a much different perspective than humans do, which should not be a surprise. I suspect the same is true for many powerful races. How should I put it, instinct? If I'm flying around and see a demi-human tribe living in a valley, many things occur to me with little active thought. What race they are, why they've settled there, the probable extent of their territory and activities based on what they need to live. I measure their impact on the local environment and potential interactions with other populations in the area. By doing so countless times with everything I observe, I create a picture of the world that would probably be inconceivable for most humans. She did all that? It sounded like an unfathomably more advanced form of the work she did for the highway patrol. Assessing the land, identifying potential threats and keeping track of traffic was something she was still being trained to do. Why would that be something instinctual to you? Nemel asked. Because I'm a dragon? Dame Verilyn answered with a tilt of her head. Also, I mentioned that it probably happens with many powerful races. When one is powerful, they can do anything they wish. But this does not mean that they do things simply because they can. It is much like how intelligent predators don't obliterate entire herds of Nook for no reason, instead preferring to selectively cull away undesirable elements. The Nook also understand this. The old, infirm, sick and weak sacrifice themselves for the greater good of the herd. Species that exist above must tend to those below. Drastic measures are taken only if they are deemed necessary for the greater good of the world's balance. Humans, however, are amongst the weakest of races. Furthermore, they do not employ the broad, complementary strategies that other weak races like goblins do. Humans are a weak race that seeks to dominate while not being blessed with the nature of those born to dominate. They do not respect the order of the world, instead striving to impose their own order upon it. This is the reason why Curtis said that other races tend to see humans as pests. Being cast in such a miserable light, Nemel could only slouch in her chair despondently. Were humans really such a malignant race? I can see how I overlooked this, Dame Verilyn mused. The humans I interact with the most do not have this perspective due to their positions, or rather they were raised to think differently than most humans. What makes them so special? Lady Zaradnik is a ranger. Rangers are effectively hunters or predators, so they are gifted with a similar, overarching perspective that allows one to consider nature in a wide-scale, systemic manner. Furthermore, she is what many races call a warden. This places her in a position akin to those powerful races that I mentioned. She and her friends are also nobles, effectively making them human lords able to easily grasp and understand the dynamics of the land and its people. But I'm a noble, Nemel frowned. This stuff isn't something I've ever thought about. Dame Verilyn looked up from her meal, regarding Nemel sadly. It's an unfortunate reality of being human, she said. You were not born with knowledge and not guaranteed to effectively harness your instincts as a human lord. I recently learned that your offspring can't even speak without needing to be taught, which is extraordinarily strange to me. Because of this, humans are not uniform in their capabilities. A noble ignorant of what they are, where they fit in the grand scheme of things and what they must do is simply an individual undeserving of their position as a human lord. Maybe I'm not that kind of noble. You are, Dame Verilyn said. You are a human lord, Nemel Gran, though not of a type I've seen before. I can sense that what I speak of is something that you understand. This understanding is not a product of rationalization, but a feeling born of ability that you must learn to frame in ways you can apply. That you have begun to harness this ability also tells me something else. You've genuinely placed yourself in my keeping. This trust allows you to truly listen. What you learn will help you to realize your full potential as a human lord. Nemel felt like she was being instilled with some esoteric knowledge no one should be able to understand. Was this really all right? Why are you putting so much effort into me? Because you're supposed to pay me taxes. If I'm pleased with the results, I might even let you pay me more. So that means you're going to keep me even with all these other people trying to take my place? Dame Verilyn peered at her suspiciously. Are you trying to renege on our agreement? Not at all. Nemel frantically waved her hands in front of her. I'm perfectly happy with it. Dame Verilyn rose from her seat, brushing off the remnants of dinner. Good, she said. It's about time I got moving. What are you doing? Nemel asked. Dame Verilyn smiled a smiley smile. Nemel wondered what it meant. Exploiting human simplicity. Conrad Martin stomped his boots over the damp cobblestones, shaking loose the winter mud. It didn't work, of course, and he ended up scraping what he could off on the steps of the East Estate Adventurer Guild. The single magical light above the guild hall's entrance seemed to condemn him with its cold glare over the mess he tracked on the stone. He pushed open the door with a leather-clad hand. Warm air billowed over him. At this late hour, the guild was packed full of those returned from commissions or simply gathering as they usually did at night. Some raised their heads to see who had opened the door while the rest remained relaxed around their tables. A few were waiting for collection results to be tallied from the craft guilds around the city. Others were trading information. Most were exchanging banter. The tavern below the guild brought orders of food and refreshments up to them, filling the air with an appetizing aroma. Scanning over the occupants, it didn't take long for Conrad to spot two of the faces he was looking for. He flipped off his cowl and the floorboards creaked despite his best efforts to prevent it as made his way over. A wiry, middle-aged woman with sunken cheeks greeted him as he seated himself on a long bench at a pine table. Short trip, the woman, a veteran ranger named Natalie, said. Which one you take? Southwestern corner, Conrad replied. Figured I'd pick the fastest one and grab whatever was left once I got back. Whatever's left, eh? She looked past his shoulder. Did the imps say anything to ya? No, why? Natalie kept looking past him. Conrad turned to see what it was. About 10 meters behind him was the board for commissions. His eyes narrowed at what he saw. The hell? When did all that come in? When else would it come in? A rumbling voice rolled out from the other adventurer at the table. You've only been out for 3 days. Work for the adventurer guilds of the Baharuth Empire had a certain regularity to it due to the orderly routines of the imperial administration. Every morning, an imperial knight would come to deliver a folder containing the new commissions for the day. Though private requests were posted from time to time, government work was the vast majority. Those commissions, consisting of tasks that the imperial administration thought better handled by adventurers, were usually taken by noon. The board behind him now, however, was covered in dozens of requests. That's why we asked, Natalie said. We thought the first batch was just the imps checking for something their scouts couldn't sniff out. With this many, something's happening, marked. What did you see out there? They're all for the blister? Natalie and the man, Ben, nodded. Conrad frowned. That wasn't good. Around him, he sensed other adventurers leaning in to listen to their conversation. I didn't see anything out of sorts. Conrad leaned forward on his elbow. Nothing's different. Same beasts, same demis, same monsters. They aren't behaving any differently. Has the army been moving funny since I left? Nope, Ben said. The imps don't hire adventurers if nothing is going on, though. A fugitive? Tribe getting pushed out from the inside? Conrad idly flexed his fingers, watching the muscles of his forearm move as his mind worked to come up with an explanation. It's all ranger work? He asked. Ben smirked. Nothing else has come up. My team's hoppin' mad about it. All three of them were rangers for their respective groups. Ben and Natalie were from platinum-ranked teams, while Conrad was mithril. Ranger work was solo work, usually tracking and scouting best done without a slow and noisy team in tow. Naturally, their teams got nothing out of it. It was an annoying aspect of working in the Empire, since the majority of work was issued by local government. They could coordinate adventurers by controlling what work was available at any given time. Their influence was such that they could even make the guilds stash away commissions for the same purpose. Contracts with the craft guilds were much the same. If the Empire wanted something done, they threw their weight around to do it. So they're casting a net. Conrad mused. For what? No one knows, Natalie said. After the second batch came in, people held back on taking them. This is too obvious and too strange. A fourth joined them. By the smell of his cologne, it was Conrad's party leader, a bard that went by the name of Windir. Conrad didn't like him much, but he more than pulled his weight. Most of the work in putting leads together and coming up with information useful for the jobs that they took was the result of his efforts. He also wasn't entirely useless in a fight. The guild finally caved in and paid a few of our casters to contact the other cities around the blister, he said. It's the same everywhere. They're sending adventurers to scout around the blister. Some of the parts deeper in, too. In? Conrad frowned, as in? Not that far in, Windir replied with a dismissive wave of his hand. There aren't any jobs for the interior, but they're ordering scouts up into the mountains. The strange part is that the Second Legion's deployments haven't changed much outside of the cities, but we found out that their quartermasters have been quietly stocking up for the last 2 months. Not just shuffling around supplies from the disbanded legions, either. The craft guilds are being skimmed for all sorts of things. So it was something that they knew was going to happen far in advance. The reorganization of the Imperial Army made covering the movement of everything from soldiers to supplies a simple matter. They could even take down and put up new installations and it wouldn't seem out of sorts. Conrad suspected that there was more going on than anyone had caught on to, but the question remained as to why they were doing it. Anything else? No one said anything in East Estate, but a few people in the other cities pointed out that the frequency of air patrols has slowly gone up. This new information narrowed down the possibilities considerably. In Conrad's mind, it could only mean one thing. One of the old bitch's babies got pushed out of the nest. Probably. Price of poison resistance gear and antidotes are gonna go up. Already did, Windir said. The Imperial Army was probably keeping prices stable by stocking up over months. Didn't stop there, either. Magical arrows, bolts, enchanted ammunition for scorpions and the like, everything they need to take down an adult dragon. Seems more and more people have been figuring it out and prices for all that stuff went through the roof while you were away. Gods damn it all. Deep within the steaming jungles of the blister was the lair of an ancient green dragon. This dragon happened to be female and, while no one could figure out who her consort was, she occasionally laid eggs as proof of their activities. She had been doing so long before the Empire was the Empire. Fortunately for the Empire, a green dragon's idea of parenting only went about as far as allowing wimmelings to stick around their parents' territory until they neared adulthood. Unfortunately for the Empire, that meant they had to deal with near-adult green dragons being kicked out of the blister every once in a while. One might question the prudence of doing something like killing young dragons around their mother's lair, but a green dragon being a green dragon, she didn't really care. Those who had what it took to succeed, did. Those who didn't weren't worth another moment's thought. In a way, she was more callously meritocratic than even the most bright-eyed graduate coming out of the Imperial Magic Academy. Some even joked that she was the true source of the Empire's meritocratic policies, as green dragons just loved to meddle in the affairs of mortals. That being said, the Baharuth Empire had a strange sort of relationship with the Baroness of the Blister. She was mostly content to glean a small percentage of the region's productivity as tribute. For an individual, it was a ludicrous amount. For the prosperous cities around the blister, however, it was a paltry sum. They couldn't be sure whether the dragon was aware of this or not, and they certainly weren't stupid enough to ask. In return, the region received the protection of an ancient green dragon against threats that only beings of such power could face. There was also the idea that she considered the area around the blister her domain, But dragons didn't seem to think much of the kingdoms and empires of weak races appearing in their territory, so issues of that nature never arose. The only real problem was the one they likely faced now: a dragon was on the loose somewhere around the blister. Having a juvenile or adult green dragon ransacking towns and villages in the countryside was the least of the Empire's problems. If it slipped through their net, it could establish a lair in another part of the Empire. There, it would remain undetected until it became too powerful of a threat to deal with. A gust of cold air whispered over the floorboards as the door opened again. The boisterous atmosphere of the Adventurer Guild abruptly stilled. "Holy hell!" Ben breathed. Conrad frowned at the rare expression from the veteran ranger. His frown deepened when he realized everyone in his field of view was staring in the same direction. Once again, he looked over his shoulder. Holy hell, indeed. At least he kept his jaw from dropping open. Aside from that, he was spellbound. The entrance to the Adventurer Guild quietly closed behind what could only be described as a figure from an impossible dream. Adorned in an outfit reminiscent of the moonlit peaks of the Azalizia Mountains nestled in a backdrop of stars, a woman made her way past tables of awestruck adventurers. Frost blue hair framed a perfect face bejeweled with turquoise eyes. Full lips turned up in a bewitchingly slight smile. Conrad's gaze traced over her more than modest curves, and it was when his attention was drawn down her long legs that he realized something was amiss. I can't hear her steps. She was walking over the well-worn wooden boards, yet he, a Mithril-ranked ranger, could not hear a thing. His eyes traveled back up her figure as he instinctively attempted to gauge her strength, but there was nothing. This either meant that she was too weak to recognize or she was concealing her strength somehow. The fact that she could defeat his keen ranger's senses probably meant the latter. His bench shifted as Windia rose to his feet and approached her. Conrad wanted to groan in preemptive embarrassment. Bards could be very perceptive as well, but, knowing Windia, his caution had gone out the window at the sight of the entrancing new arrival. "Welcome, madam," the bard performed a graceful bow with an eloquent gesture. "Welcome to our humble Adventurer Guild. Might I ask what fortuitous event has graced us with your—" Windia's words trailed off, and he visibly paled. "Ah," he finally noticed. The bard's gaze rested on the woman's bosom, but it was probably not her beauty that now commanded his attention. "My?" the woman prompted in a pleasing voice. It's nothing." Beads of sweat formed on Windia's brow. "Pardon me." He returned to his seat. Natalie let out a snort. "Good job, Windia," she said. "You were staring so hard at her tits that you didn't notice what was sitting on top of them." "What's an adamantite team doing here?" Windia whispered. "Where is she even from? I've never even heard of an adamantite rank adventurer that matches her description." Neither had Conrad. If it was one thing all adventurers kept track of, it was who the adamantite ranked teams were in the region. "Blue Rose is full of blondes," Ben muttered. "The beautiful princesses is supposed to have black hair. The rest are all male teams or teams of non-humans from Ardland or Carnassus." "I got nothing." "She isn't from anywhere near here, then," Conrad said. "But that doesn't make sense." Everyone looked at him. "Why not?" Natalie asked. "I mean, look what's happening." "Yeah?" Conrad gestured back towards the board. "The Empire's casting a net. Now an adamantite adventurer is here. If this screens a juvie that's about to get kicked out because they've become an adult or they're getting close, we'll need a good orichalcum or adamantite team to deal with it. That's why we suddenly have all these commissions. We're already set up to strike as soon as we find this thing." The Imperial administration and the legions were nothing if not well organized. Everything had been planned well in advance. "All right, I follow," Ben said slowly, "but what about that doesn't make sense?" Having new adventurers of higher ranks appear in the Baharuth Empire was not considered rare. This was actually the normal way of things, as the Imperial army made work below platinum non-existent. Adventurers either made their way up inside the Empire's borders through some other avenue, or they migrated in from other countries to partake of the lucrative commissions issued by the Imperial administration. "'Cause none of us have ever heard of her before," Conrad said. "Why would they bring in an adamantite from God's knows where when there are a half-dozen teams in the countries around us? Frivoltz's team left for Carnassus, but we still got 8 ripples in the east. The Empire's in bed with the Sorceress Kingdom now, too, so they could have pulled in darkness." The adventurers around the table nodded at his reasoning. Maybe they drew her team in to replace Frivolz's band, Windir offered. That's the only thing I can think of. One thing, though, are these new arrivals strong enough to replace Silver Threadbird? I can't even figure out what she is, Natalie said. That outfit isn't any armor I've seen before. No weapons, either. A monk, then, Ben reasoned. If you can find a monk that flashy, sure. Whatever she is, Conrad said, she's sneaky as hell. How so? Windir asked. The entire table rolled their eyes at him. We couldn't hear her, Conrad explained. She walked by on this noisy-ass floor barely a meter away and I couldn't hear a damn thing. You couldn't? Windir's mouth hung open in confusion, but that means... Windir swallowed as realization struck him mute. He looked back at the woman, who was still examining the postings on the board, with unabashed awe. The woman wasn't part of an adamantite team, she was powerful enough to match an entire adamantite team. Before them was one of humanity's greatest champions. A singular individual who had stepped beyond the threshold of their meager comprehension and into the realm of myth and legend. A hero stood before them. There aren't any here. Ilishnish leaned forward slightly with a hand on her hip, lips turned out in a pout. Her finger traced over the commission board as she went from posting to posting, searching for any propositions that tickled her fancy. Investigate, investigate, investigate. Why are they all investigate? People always wanted her to investigate things. Lady Shiltier, Lady Zaradnik, the Adventurer Guild, first, the one in Erantle and now this one in East Estate. Investigate was so vague and everyone who demanded investigation somehow always expected a tangible result when they didn't even know what was there. Where was the terrorize, pillage, and exterminate? Even kill 5 goblins or fetch me a cow would have been fine. That was what these adventurers did, didn't they? She leaned further forward as she scanned down the board. The adventurers watching her leaned forward too. Ilishnish's lips turned up in a slight smile. In many things, humans were so ridiculously simple. This simplicity was what she had come to exploit, except the desired avenue of exploitation did not appear to exist. Lady Zaradnik mentioned something about the Empire's adventurer guilds only having platinum rank commissions or higher due to the efforts of the Imperial Army. Lady Wagner told her that the area around the Blister and the Golden Strand was the most productive region of the Empire, so any commission should be suitably lucrative. Local interests invested a portion of their riches to ensure the continued generation of more riches. Unlike powerful apex predators, humans tended to pay no mind to the effect that they had on the world around them. They just grew and expanded and consumed. Everything they could take advantage of was a resource. Anything that interfered with industry was a threat to society or a dangerous creature. If they could kill winter so they could have another growing season, they probably would. The commissions in front of her all involved forays that sent adventurers deeper into the Green Dragon's domain. Before she departed in Gelfort, Lady Zaradnik informed her that she would be acting as a liaison in the area to help conduct an operation to oust the region's current overlord. She had asked Ilishnish to be aware of what was going on in the area, so all of these commissions were probably something that followed a similar vein. They needed to get a lay of the land before going on the offensive. Ilishnish slowly straightened to stand. A sigh rose from the tables nearby. Human simplicity, if that was the case, this was a twist on that very same nature. Merchants positioned their inventories in such a way that what they wanted to sell received prospective clients' attention. The Adventurer Guild might be making sure that these commissions were being taken first in the same way. While the ones posted before her were probably easy enough to complete, encroaching on another dragon's territory in such a manner was just plain rude. That being said, while the impending operation demanded investigation, it didn't mean everything else humans saw as inconveniences to their civilization conveniently vanished. Their inventory of regular commissions was probably piling up somewhere. She scanned the guild hall through her blind sight, but there weren't any other boards around. Would the receptionists know? Ishpan and Winner answered questions in the Erantle Adventurer Guild, so it was probably the same here. She examined the 2 women at the counter. They were young and possessed the pleasing qualities that humans seem to favor when interacting with others. Both wore an outfit similar to receptionists from the 2 other adventurer guilds she had seen. Ilishnish settled her nerves, thankful for the mental reinforcement that she received from her new bond with Lady Zaradnik. She wouldn't have been able to enter the building so boldly without it. Normally, If she was allowed to have things her way, Ilishnish would have stalked around a location for days before deciding she knew enough about it to enter. A part of her told her that doing so was for good reason, while another part reasoned that it was unreasonable in her current circumstances. The former would have won out if not for Lady Zaradnik's influence. The two receptionists turned extra attentive as she approached the counter. "Good evening," Ilishnish smiled. "I was wondering if you had any regular commissions available. I feel it unwise to be participating in the current event." The receptionist stared across the counter at her, expressions changing as comprehension seemed to slowly dawn upon them. "Ah, of course," one of them nodded respectfully. "Just one moment please." As the receptionist turned away to enter the back office, the other looked up at Ilishnish with excitement in her eyes. If you don't mind, may I examine your identity plate?" "My identity plate? Oh, you mean this." Ilishnish unfastened the chain of her Adventurer Guild tag, placing it on the counter between them. The receptionist reverently retrieved the adamantite plate. Shiver. Her eyes widened as she continued reading. Rantle? You're an adventurer from the Sorceress Kingdom?" "That's right," Ilishnish replied. "See? There's nothing wrong with Shiver. I come up with perfectly good names." With her promotion came a brainstorming session for her moniker as an adamantite adventurer. Guildmaster Einsack came up with Dancing Dragon, while Ishpin and Winner put forward Graceful Muse. Lady Aura wanted White Death. Moments suggested Winterguita, whatever that meant. For some reason, Lady Wagner liked that one too when she told her about it. In the end, they ran out of time and she stuck with Shiver, much to her relief. "What are these bars beside your name?" the receptionist asked. "The Sorceress Kingdom's Adventurer Guild has different adamantite ranks," Ilishnish explained. "One bar is for entry-level adamantites, 2 is for someone in the realm of heroes. A third bar was added recently, but only Momin and Nobbe of Darkness occupy that rank." How many adamantite rank adventurers does the Sorceress Kingdom have? If you're referring to those within our Adventurer Guild, not many. Beings equivalent to adamantite rank adventurers, however, are quite plentiful. The first receptionist returned to the counter, cradling a box in her arms. She slowed upon crossing the divider from the hall, peering out past Ilishnish. "What's going on here?" "People are coming closer to listen," Ilishnish shrugged. "Is that not permitted?" 24 or so adventurers had slowly crept closer while she was speaking to the second receptionist. Ilishnish patiently waited while the receptionist sorted through the commissions stored in the box. "If there are so many powerful beings in the Sorceress Kingdom," someone asked, "then what's the point in having an adventurer guild?" "While we employ the same progression of ranks," Ilishnish answered, "our adventurer guild is a fundamentally different organization. If I've heard correctly, His Majesty the Sorcerer King made a related announcement last spring?" Ilishnish reached out and went through the first stack of commissions laid on the counter. The assortment was primarily orichalcum and mithril-rated requests. There were rumors about something like that happening in the capital, a woman spoke up, after the Sorcerer King beat the Martial Lord in the Grand Arena. "Exploring the unknown and understanding the world." "Understanding depends on the individual," Ilishnish said. "As for exploration, there is plenty of that. For instance, the Azalizia expedition started late this summer and is still in progress." "Expedition?" A burly man mouthed the term as if it was unfamiliar. "That sounds like what the army is doing with the 6th Legion. Last I heard, they were training up to conquer some part of the frontier." "As the gentleman from before has already noted," Ilishnish replied, "there is no need for that sort of work with how powerful the Sorceress Kingdom's forces are. Our Adventurer Guild expeditions are essentially exploratory activities within a designated region. Expeditionary camps consist of 30 adventurers gold-ranked and above, divided into 5 parties of 6. Those parties work together to achieve the goals of their particular leg of the expedition." She continued reading through the commissions, then stopped at one that was strangely marked. Separating it from the stack, she flipped it around and held it up in front of the receptionists. "What are all these markings for?" Ilishnish asked. "Oh, that's a cancelled commission." The first receptionist reached out to take the page from her. "It must have snuck into the pile somehow." "Was the job no longer necessary?" "Essentially, yes. During the summer, the Imperial Army rescinded all requests for assistance in the forests and foothills west of the border. It was roughly half the work of our branch here in East Estate. Wasn't just army work. Army doesn't want us going out into the Azalisia wilderness period. Commissions for air materials are harder to fill now, and the price for the goods that use them have gone up. Ilishnish turned at the resentful voice. A tall man of perhaps 30 years stood on the right side of the semicircle gathered around her. He had a lean, well-muscled look to him, and his arms were crossed over a suit of enchanted brigandine. A mithril plate hung from his neck. By his overall appearance, he appeared to be a ranger. That's probably because they don't want their adventurers poaching, Ilishnish said. Poaching? The wilderness you're referring to is home to many. Not only is the kingdom of the mountain dwarves to the west experiencing a resurgence, but the entire Azalisia mountain range and its surrounding forests from the Duchy of Erantal to the northern coast have become territories of the Sorceress Kingdom. The residents of those territories hold the land rights. Trespassing to hunt, forage and extract resources without their permission is illegal. So what they say about demi-humans and heteromorphs becoming subjects of the Sorceress Kingdom is true. Ilishnish nodded, and a dull murmur rose as the gathered adventurers discussed amongst themselves. By the sounds of it, it appeared to be new information, though why the Imperial administration hadn't notified them was a mystery. The exchange with her new minion brought to mind a question of her own. Out of curiosity, have there been any raids on Imperial lands by the tribes to the west since summer? The adventurers exchanged glances with one another. A portly man in a brown robe shook his head. I haven't seen a job involving that sort of thing since about then, no. The caravans to the Dwarf Kingdom don't look for escorts, either, another adventurer added. They actually hire escorts going into the Empire. Seemed as backwards, but they pay fairly and on time, so I didn't think much about it. Guess we know why that is now. Isn't the Imperial Army supposed to be responsible for domestic security? Ilishnish asked. That's why lower-rank adventurers don't work here, yes? Yep. Adventurers Platinum and over exist because the Imperial Army can only deal with things up to around there. Frontiers full of things they can't handle. That was about to change. The first contingents of Death Series servitors were already being delivered in the south. Eventually, they would be employed here as well. Work that involved raw, martial strength was about to vanish for these adventurers. Ilishnish turned back to the pile of commissions. She wanted to snap up as many of them as possible before the Empire's integration of undead forces was complete. She didn't get very far before she was interrupted again. Why is the Sorceress Kingdom sending these expeditions into the Azalisia Mountains if they've already claimed them? Because expeditions are for exploration and discovery. She looked over her shoulder, as His Majesty has advertised. Even a range as small as the Azalisia Mountains takes a long time to investigate. I imagine they'll be working their way through the peaks and valleys for a while yet. What kind of stuff have they done so far? Let's see. During the midsummer, they blazed a trail from the Duchy of Erantal to Fiorizo, doing survey work for the Ministry of Transportation. It was mostly uneventful, aside from getting attacked by frost giants on 2 occasions. The crowd grew more animated at her mention of the demi-humans, and they shifted forward as if to press her for details. Why did humans get excited about things that could hurt them? It felt like a collective deviancy that they were born with as a species. What happened? Someone asked. Were you there? The first time, Ilishnish answered, they ran into a large scouting party in the foothills. The frost giants were using winter wolves as well. I was delivering something to the expedition camp at the time and ended up helping out a bit. Helping out? How many did you kill? About a third of the total number, so 5. At least that's what they said they started out with. Roughly half of the humans frowned at her statement. Wait, didn't you say an expedition is 30 members? One of them said, they were fighting 15 frost giants. What rank were the adventurers? 3 parties were composed of gold-ranked members, 2 were platinum-ranked parties, and 1 was mithril-ranked. The mithril party had an orichalcum-ranked ranger. I think she whittled them down by 3 or 4 while they were still coming in. Is that possible? Gold ranks can't stand up to frost giants like that. She said they used parties of 6, another adventurer offered, so it might be. The scouting party was mostly composed of younger frost giants looking to prove themselves, Ilishnish told them. Our guild's adventurers also train on a daily basis, so their combat proficiency and other vocational skills are highly refined. The second time the expedition encountered frost giants was far worse. They were ambushed by an experienced warband in the middle of a snowstorm. Fortunately, they were able to hold out long enough for my party to drop in on them. A number of the adventurers looked up as if they were attempting to picture the scene. They probably had it wrong. How often do people die on these expeditions? Someone asked. The survey I described was probably out of the ordinary, Ilishnish answered. It's extremely rare to find anything as powerful as frost giants in the lowlands. They explored the ruins of Fiotivaz over the autumn with no fatalities to speak of. I suppose people die in training accidents as well, but we haven't yet lost an adventurer permanently. Permanently? Yes, we have access to resurrection magic, so the most they need to do is undergo retraining to gain their strength back. Ilishnish turned her attention back to the commissions before they could offer a reaction. She hoped that they wouldn't ask any more questions. The Sorceress Kingdom's Adventurer Guild had asked her to spread awareness of their organization, but Lady Wagner once told her that people were more likely to believe information that they had to work for, and talking too much was usually a bad thing. Ilishnish agreed with the human noble. It could be interpreted as a sign of desperation. Lady Zaradnik tended to speak sparingly when possible, as she believed that those who spoke more than they needed tended to have little substance to them. Something about the emptiest containers making the most noise. The guild branch might also get mad at Ilishnish if they thought she was trying to steal their members. Settling on 3 jobs she thought she could complete before she needed to help Zushiro at his stall, Ilishnish had the receptionist mark their locations on her map. They all involved murdering people, so it would be simple enough,